Hi, I am Lindsay. I'm Child Life Specialist with a Children's House for the Soul. And for a special edition of our Back to School Boot Camp today, we have Dr. Elena Kennedy Nasser. Dr. Elena, as her patients fondly call her, is double board certified in pediatric hematology oncology and in pediatrics. She is one of the fantastic members of our board of directors, and she is also the founder of Pure Pediatrics, which is a special concierge pediatric service here in Houston. Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Elena.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, we want to spend some time talking with you about returning to school. We know that parents probably have been asking you lots of questions about sending their kids back to school in person or having concerns about their kiddos being online. So we would love your feedback on that. All right, so my first question for you is, what should parents know about keeping their kiddos safe if they're returning back to an in-person school environment?
Well, I think that each situation is unique, and it really comes down to the parents feeling comfortable with the safety procedures that the school actually already put in place. So some schools, most schools, have been very specific with their guidelines and their protocol. This has run into a few problems, and I'll touch on that in a second, because I think that the winter months for pediatrics is about to look, it always looks kind of bad, but it's about to look very different in terms of the normal situation for us as pediatricians was that someone would get sick and then they'd have to come to the doctor or call us for an excuse, say that they got an excused absence. And it seems that the tide has turned a little bit, and now a lot of the schools have very specific guidelines as to things that you have to do in order for your child to go back. So I felt like before there was this push for get them back in school, get them back in school, get them back in school. And now with this novel coronavirus, the push is don't come back, don't come back, don't come back. And I don't think any school wants to be the cluster, and that's the biggest problem. So you need to know what the school safety rules are. You want to know, are they going to have them in separate pods? So are these kids going to stay together throughout the day? How much exposure do they really get to the entire school? What percentage of the school is even returning? I mean, most schools, I would say even with private schools, I know a lot of parents who chose virtual over in person. For us, because people ask me, so I bet you will ask me, our child has to start virtual at her school, but she'll go back in person is our plan. And then, we have to play it by ear a little bit. So be willing to be flexible. I think in general, it's probably pretty safe. The data is reassuring, but we know that there's going to be more cases, and we know it's going to flare once colleges and schools get open. So make sure you feel like your school is at least doing their part with the safety precautions. My preference is wearing a mask for everyone over the age of 2, if they'll do it, even in our office. And kids, they just will do what the parents do. If the parents have a good attitude and come in here wearing a mask and they have matching masks, the child does very well wearing a mask. You can breathe perfectly fine. I read an entire kid's book the other day wearing a mask because I forgot to take it off.
Thank you. That's a very helpful answer, and I agree. If the parents are wearing a mask or the teachers are wearing a mask, the kiddos tend to do a pretty good job.
Right.
Okay, that was super helpful. Actually, you asked answered several questions in one. Okay, I was going to ask, how do you think parents should encourage things like hand washing and keeping safe social distance, especially with older kids who may have peers that may or may not be doing it when they're all together?
Yeah, so here's the good news. Being outside is pretty safe in general. So it turns out like the sky is very big and fast. And in order to spread viruses and illness, you really need to be in close proximity to someone, which is the 6 feet of separation, and be really kind of talking at each other, correct? And especially if you're in a closed room with poor circulation. Turns out once you're outside, they really do well. I mean, I keep waiting to hear case reports of cyclists who are all together getting COVID, or runners, or people who are out hiking. And I just haven't seen any of that. And the reality is an indoor restaurant is a really high risk activity. Being outside is very low risk. So what I'm encouraging kids and parents to do is outdoor play dates. Just do it outside, because the kids do need the socialization. I mean, they're really starving for it at this point. It's very important. So as many things that you can just do outside, and then you can set a timer like on your watch. And it's like when it beeps, oh, we just wash our hands, but we don't want to be overly aggressive about it too. We're seeing a lot of hand dermatitis. So the dermatologists are about to get busy too. And then there's a lot of data about the hand sanitizers. Are they as good as we think? And could they be causing harm? It's hard to say. So I tell people, don't be OCD about it, like obsessive. So you just want to encourage these good, healthy habits. Turns out kids were supposed to be washing their hands after they go to the bathroom and all the things, and they just weren't. So now we want them to do that.
Perfect. Thank you. You actually began to touch on this a little bit, but how do we sort of balance generating that feeling of being cautious and being aware with our kids without creating extra fear or anxiety? How do you encourage parents to sort of tread the line?
Oh, it's hard. I think that we have some parents who already are, germaphobes themselves. And it's kind of funny because I feel like the germaphobes are kind of winning. They were like all along. And, none of them have caught it because they were already so worried at baseline anyway. But at the same time, sometimes that's an unhealthy obsession. And so we really want to just, tell kids, in our house, it's just like, wash your hands before dinner, you wash your hands when you come in, you wash your hands. But, setting a timer and washing them every 15 minutes is probably not going to be helpful. And then they've had a lot more data that comes out. This really seems to be an airborne issue in closed spaces with poor, circulation of the air, as opposed to touching things, and so once again, outside's probably the safest. I'm glad they're reopening the playgrounds. A healthy dose of we're going to wash our hands before we eat, or we're going to wash our hands because we sneezed into our hands. Kids were already supposed to be covering their cough or sneezing into their elbow, and so now it turns out we'll be wearing a mask, and they can sneeze into their mask. It is kind of gross though. And so please, I hope the teachers will let them, if they sneeze into their mask or something, sometimes just make sure you have a fresh mask. All kids should go to school with a fresh change of clothes and a couple of extra masks. That's what I would do.
That's good advice. And I think probably it also goes with what you said about the masks before. If parents are being cautious but not overly fearful, the child will follow suit and
Right.
follow them.
Always emulate their parents' behavior. Every time I even see a newborn, I'm like, so she's very chill. Which one of you? And then when a kiddo's like super hyper, one parent's like, oh, it's me. For the most part, you made your children. So they take the traits of you and your partner, and so you can kind of figure it out from there. But if you do have a child who's overly fearful to the point that they're having anxiety, it's definitely worth talking to someone, because we are going to have kids have more anxiety about being around others at school. I do think in some ways, once they get into the process and they've done it, then it'll be like, oh, okay, this is manageable. We experienced that because we had done a time of traveling, and we were at the very beginning, we're like, oh, I don't know. And then once we got into it, we're like, okay, this is manageable. Like we just had to learn to live and manage it to safely prevent catching coronavirus, and still trying to live.
Absolutely. The unknown is always a little bit scarier than the known, I think.
Yeah. It's very true, especially for children. And I think that if you constantly tell them you're going to get grandma sick, you're going to get grandma sick, you're going to get grandma sick, if grandma gets sick, even if your child doesn't have coronavirus, your child might think they got grandma sick. So I think it's important to say, oh, we don't want to catch this, that we don't, spread it to people who might be more vulnerable to us. But just keep in mind, we never want a child to think they are the reason or the cause that someone else got sick.
Absolutely. Balancing it so that they can take responsibility for their own behavior, but not take responsibility for everything.
Right, exactly.
That's, that's brilliant. I wanted to ask you a little bit about virtual learning and sort of what your thoughts are with the extra screen time. You know, a lot of parents are really nervous about screen time and they've been following closely, you know, that 2 hour limit for years. And now they're setting their kiddo in front of the screen for school. What do you tell parents who are afraid of that and how it affects children's development?
Well, I mean, it's a lot where, we'll see, you'll get a dinner and there'll be a table and they're all quiet. And it's because every child at the table is like staring at some sort of iPad or an iPhone. And it's amazing. They'll be like 15 months old and they're clearly like, engaged in using it. So the American Academy of Pediatrics and myself still strongly discourages the use of screen time at a young age. Having said that, a lot of schools are going to be doing preschool virtually. That's tough. The screen itself, has some addictive qualities. It can also cause eye strain. Yeah, I feel like the iPhone's even worse when it comes to like the blue light and those sorts of things. Some people even get headaches, and just it bothers them to sit there and constantly have to stare at these screens. So we're going to see that throughout all of the ages. And so, just keep in mind if suddenly they're having headaches, maybe it's the screen. I don't think that Zoom is going to make them addicted to Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
So in a fairness, I think if you still continue to set the normal limits when it comes to social media usage or YouTube or watching TV and so forth, and it's like, well, these things have to be done virtually, then to me, you should still be in pretty good control of this. I think what happens and what happened in our house is we're not nearly as available because we're at work. And if someone's virtually learning, even if another adult is at home, they're not staring at them this entire time. And so can they quickly go straight from Zoom to YouTube? And they can. So there are apps where you can set parental controls. I think having a very good discussion with your children as to what your expectations are ahead of time is better, because we know that too much screen time is actually bad for them. It also increases depression, anxiety, and all these other things, especially in the preteen and teenagers. So keep in mind, just still need to minimize it while living in a Zoom environment. And by the end of 2020, we will so be tired of Zoom, or we'll love it. I don't know which one yet.
Absolutely. It sounds like the key to almost all of this is finding balance.
Well, I think that's the key to everything, right? I mean, I do wish that I have some families who are very stressed about the situation still. And then I have, and they still haven't really left their house. And so I've kind of encouraged them to go ahead and eat at an outdoor restaurant. Like you're going to want to get out a little bit, because I think it takes away a little bit of the fear factor that they're probably experiencing, because it can be very socially isolating. And we really want these kids to not necessarily be socially isolated. But it's been a difficult several months. It's been weird. I don't see it improving, with school opening and with college opening. It might get worse, and we anticipate we're still going to have that second wave. And if we don't control the flu season, we could get into some trouble here. So hopefully everyone does wear their mask and we just work together as a community, and just, it's going to lengthen out the time that it takes for this to run its course, but we have to kind of wait it out at this point without stressing the children out or yourself.
Wait it out without stressing out.
Right. Go back to the driveway party. Those are pretty successful.
That sounds good, Dr. Elena. Well, those were all of my questions for you. Do you have anything else you want to share with families that maybe I didn't ask about?
So I think the main questions I get is I just keep getting asked, do I go back to school? Do I do virtual? And I keep reiterating the same thing. Well, actually, I keep getting tapes saying the same thing, and then I refer them to a video. So it's really a personal decision. So a lot of schools are going to offer, either a hybrid or going back in person or going online. And for some families, if you live with multiple different people of varying ages in your family unit, then online might be the best. Now, one question is online learning as good as in person? I don't know. My first thought would be probably not, but I think it depends on the school, and some schools really probably do it well. And but you're all, and the best thing I feel like the best saying I've heard about this whole thing is that we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats.
Mm.
And I think it's really important to remember, because you might have a neighbor who's in a completely different boat and they have to send their children to school, they have to send them to daycare, and they can't work from home. And then you might have someone else who can do all those things, or you might have a community where they can't even afford internet. And so we're all in the same storm, but we all have different boats. And that's why it's important just to be very accepting of everyone's decision. And also just accept that sometimes you'll see someone not wearing a mask, and it's okay. You can just kind of walk around them, but to not really confront or make a terribly big deal, because maybe there's some reason, maybe that child's autistic, and there's a reason from a sensory standpoint they can't wear the mask. So I think it's a good time for us all to be very accepting of one another, and just, just remember, we just have to get through the storm. 2022 is coming. I'm not even that optimistic on 2021. We'll make it.
I love that. Well, that is perfect advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Elena, for your help with all this and for all your answers. We will share your website. Is there anything else that we should share, ways people can reach you if they want to reach you?
No, I mean, check out our Facebook page. We do post pretty rarely, or we do a news segment or something else. It does go on there. Our Instagram, although Instagram's more fun because we read books sometimes with the mask on. And just remember, you still want to make life fun. Just try to see the positives. And I think that a lot of people have seen a lot of the negatives. And one big positive we saw was that we got to spend more time with our children than we probably would have, for sure, during this period. And so most of you probably experienced that too. And that's either awesome or maybe not, I don't know. It was pretty awesome. And so just remember the positives, because later that's what you normally remember anyway. And so we'll just have to get through the negative parts.
I love it. Thank you so much.
All right. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.